Hi, I'm Lizumu, or you can call me Little Sound. Vue Vapor team member. Here is our amazing plugin mega set for a big price. Check this out. You want page history or contributes? No problem. First, let's install the knowledge-based git changelog plugin, and then go to WordPress config file and import two plugins, git changelog and git changelog markdown section. Put them into Git plugins. Oh, don't forget to set the repo URL because user can click on each changelog to jump to the GitHub commit page. And then go to WordPress theme index file. Import git changelog client and import style file. Mount the changelog user interface on Vue. We have finished a WordPress plugin. If you want to use it with CI, we have some docs on how to get Git history on your CI provider. That's all done. Let's run it. And then here it is. Besides Git changelog, we also have some interesting WordPress plugins. You can switch the page layout or spotlight on your reading line, and so much more. You can find all of these on knowledge-based integrations. That's all. Hope you like these plugins. Thank you.
Hey folks, this is just a sneak peek into the treasure trove at Vueschool.io, your go-to for over 70 top-notch courses on Vue.js, Nuxt, TypeScript, and more, all developed by industry experts. From Pina and Vue Router to upcoming features in Nuxt 4, we have got you covered. Start with the basics or dive into advanced topics like performance hacks, AI with GPT-4, and even web scraping. For Vue.js Nation only, grab 50% off yearly or lifetime plans. Head to vueschool.io/plans today. Don't wait.
Hello, beautiful humans. Before we dive into our panel, a few quick things like Instant Dev. Our sponsor, Instant Dev, has reimagined development delivery for modern tech world. They provide production-ready Vue.js code without the typical risks and delays. Start your project within 24 hours, scale your development as needed with their flexible credit system, and get quality guaranteed code every time. Whether you're building new features or launching complete Vue application, Instant Dev offers end-to-end delivery from a single expert team. Visit instadev.io to see how they're making Vue development more predictable and efficient. And get $50 off to get JavaScript certified. The mid-level examination that is available for JavaScript certification is really a team effort with a number of JavaScript developers from multiple platforms weighing in the effectiveness of the certification, a truly community initiative. For this event only, we are offering JavaScript certification for 50% off. Also, do not forget to use the code Certify50 to get an extra $50 off. And up next, we have our live panel. We are going to be diving into the exciting world of AI paired with your favorite framework, the importance of usage of AI in Vue.js. We will be having the hosts of the panel from Day2 with guests Daniel and Patrick, handing it over to them because they're going to do some splendid intros. Welcome to the stage, team.
Welcome to Day2.
It's your favorite Vue podcast. You just don't know it yet. I guess, maybe some of you are here since the very first episode, and we are live with the panel at Vue.js Nation 2025, everybody. Yeah, Michael, how do you feel about that?
I'm feeling great. We're going to talk about AI and Vue, and it's going to be awesome. So if you have any questions for these fine folks for this panel, put them in the chat and we might be able to get to them, and we'll see where this whole panel goes.
Absolutely. And if you want to wait, what's like Deja Vu? Never heard about that? Well, we are a weekly podcast all around the Vue ecosystem. We have amazing guests. We had like Evan Yu on, of course, a couple times, Daniel Rowe, lead of Nux team, but also Matt Pocock, right, the TypeScript wizard, CJ from Syntax, who talked about his first true love, Vue.js. And of course, today we also have amazing guests. So Michael, go ahead and introduce our first guest today.
Yeah, so our first guest is Daniel Kelly. And you may have seen him yesterday giving an awesome talk on Vue and AI. He is the lead instructor at Vue School. And so he's got like 10 years of full stack experience. He does lots of teaching, all of that amazing stuff. So can't wait to hear from him about what you're doing with AI. How are you doing today? Are you feeling a little bit better?
Here, Michael. Yeah, doing pretty good, man. Doing pretty good.
Perfect. And of course, we can't only do it with one guest. We have to have two people on here at least. And our other lovely guest is a full stack developer. He has a knack for TypeScript, really good expertise, also in Gen AI. Actually, we talked a couple of hours ago about super interesting project. And maybe if you're like a Deja Vu hardcore fan, or at least listen to episode 5, you have heard and maybe seen him already because he talked about server-side events and his side project, Career Deck AI. Welcome to the panel, Patrick van Everdingen. Patrick, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Alex. Thank you. How are you?
Good, yeah. Psyched about the panel. And as Michael said, really curious what the chat is saying. I hope big claps right now for all our amazing guests. And we should start straight away with the first question, which is a very simple one. Will we all lose our jobs to AI? What do you think, Patrick, Daniel?
Patrick, you want to take a stab at that one first?
I think we'll not lose our jobs to AI. I think we'll have new jobs coming in thanks to AI. And we'll always have some sort of job where AI will play a big role in our lives. I don't think we'll lose our jobs. No. What do you think, Danielle?
I definitely agree with that. We're going to lose our jobs as they currently stand, right? They're not going to be the same jobs. They're going to be same in some respect. In a lot of the same respects. I mean, we're still needed in that development life cycle, but they're going to be different. It's not what we originally, trained and things for 100%, right? It's going to look different.
So with these AI models getting better every couple months, we see that they're capable of more and more, and surpassing all these benchmarks and whatever hype we see on social media. Why do you think that they aren't going to take our jobs? Like there's obviously the other side that's like, oh, they can code better than the best humans. So of course, like it's only a matter of time. But like, what would you say to that point? And why do you think that they're going to need us, or we will need to use AI rather than just having a button press and build the app for us?
Well, I think an important aspect of using AI responsibly is having the human in the loop, someone who keeps track of what an AI system is doing, whether it's coding, marketing, writing content. You always need to have some sort of human approval in this entire process. I think we're doing that right now with coding. Cursor, Claude generates code for us. We check if it's valid.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. Will the code quality get better? I think so. I think if we compare to where we're standing 2 years ago, the advancements in generative AI and code assistance are the steps they're taking are very huge. I remember having that wow moment when Claude Sonnet 3.5 came out. It just blew my mind how good it was with coding. And I imagine there will have some of these moments in the nearby future as well. I mean, they're constantly evolving these models, and but still, in the end, someone needs to keep track of what the output is, and we'll still have a job in the end of the day.
Yeah, most certainly. And I think it's in the short term, it does take over the responsibilities of, the things that some people will be getting hired for now, right? Because the people that are already on the team can do those things faster. But in the longer term, the web is just going to look different because we're capable of doing more, right? And so you think about, the early days of TV and video, right? You got like black and white TV, and you've got things that just don't look as good, and then suddenly new technology comes out that makes processes and things faster to distribute it to more people and things. Does that mean people lose jobs in television because things get faster and better, logistics improve? No, it actually creates a lot more jobs because so I think that the web actually, it's a lot of the things that we do now, you're going to be able to do a lot of those things faster, but the whole experience of the web is going to increase because we're able to do those things faster, and that's just going to create the demand for even more. And so there's going to be plenty of jobs.
Yeah. To add on that, a while ago, there was this article, The Rise of the AI Engineer. And I still remember when I read that, I was a bit skeptical of like, what is this? What's the definition of an AI engineer? Are you responsible for training the models? Are you responsible for implementing those models in software? And slowly last year, I was starting to see more of those real job listings appear on LinkedIn. So I think there's a whole new demand for engineers who are implementing these models in existing software. So that also is another aspect. We lose certain kinds of jobs. Certain jobs go faster, but we also get new jobs because of this. Yeah.
I've heard it said in the past before that software developers are not programmers. They're like, we solve problems with technology, and writing code just happens to be the output of that. It's like an implementation detail. And this was like well before the AI in the last couple of years. And I think that's still true. It's just like coding is just one of the things that we do, and maybe that changes. We're wrangling AI a bit more and more over time.
Yeah.
And I think it's also a key part, Michael, what you just mentioned, like not the programmer to see as a code monkey. And hopefully maybe that's, let's say, annoying part of like, I don't know, that the boring tasks can be automated away and be stripped away like it is right now of like, okay, maybe scaffold some test cases for us. We just have to check if they're valid. But if we don't do that, well, then we have a problem. So it's also maybe a bit of like using AI for what it is good at, and not just like, it's a bit like, I don't know, if you only have a hammer, everything is a nail. So like, okay, I just use it to like generate me everything, and the outcome will not be good if you don't really check it in a way.
Yeah. Garbage in, garbage out, they say. The output of the quality of the output of your generated code is as good as how good you prompt the AI, how well you communicate what the context is of your project, how what it needs to do. And my experience with these kind of things is that the longer the task is that you define that the AI needs to solve, the higher the probability that the output of the code becomes less usable. That's my experience. I like to break things up in smaller chunks. And if you know how to prompt these smaller chunks, I think your life as an engineer becomes much easier and faster.
Yeah, for sure. And it's kind of like having a little bit of an extended memory, as less so than like another strategic part of your brain, right? It helps you remember where some things are and what patterns are kind of in the code, but it's not necessarily always thinking strategically as a human could.
No.
So we'll go to our next question, which is, how have you integrated AI into your daily workflow when you're writing code? Why don't I go to you, Daniel? You gave a talk yesterday. I think you covered some things about this. Maybe you could give just like a couple things from that talk. Don't redo your whole talk here.
Yeah,
watch the talk if you haven't seen it. Yeah, exactly.
Honestly, for me, so in content creation, I don't code every single day, but when I do, a lot of the ways I'm using AI is to brainstorm directions for my app. Like if I'm building this example application for some video series, well, what features can I build in this app to showcase the concepts that I'm teaching, right? And it can help me say, okay, try this feature out. If you want to do real-time features, try building a chat app or a stock real-time stock prices thing, and it just gives me some ideas. That's one way that it helps me. But then it goes and I can ask it, we'll suggest some some tooling and some libraries or things like that can help me in this context. But then in terms of actually coding, when I am working in the code, of course I use the autocomplete stuff. It's extremely handy. That's just the kind of the second memory part of your brain. Okay. And then every once in a while I use that composer to bootstrap a new component and things like that.
Do you trust composer mode with the YOLO mode enabled? If you've heard of it?
No, I do not.
Have you tried it?
Give maybe a little context to everybody out there who's not knowing what the composer is or YOLO modes of people not using cursor. Maybe that's a good part there. And then I'm happy to hear more about experiences with that.
Yeah. So composer mode is a feature within Cursor IDE, which in its turn is a fork of Visual Studio Code. Looks exactly the same as Visual Studio Code, has the same extensions, plugins. And it is a feature that allows a large language model to, I would say, semi-autonomously construct a new feature for you. And that is not tied or limited to just code generation in a file that you're working in. It also allows a large language model to access the file system, create new files, run stuff in the terminal. So I think it's a really innovative feature that kind of helps you get in the right direction, given that you have enough supervision. You give it enough supervision, it will work pretty well. And this YOLO mode, it's a flag that you set in the settings. It basically means, all right, I'm going to give up all control over my code editor, and I want the large language model to do whatever it wants, which also means running commands in the terminal. And I once tried it, and I said, hey, let's build this new component. It has this requirements, and sure, this, make an API call that. And I pressed enter. I went out to make coffee, returned after 10 minutes, and just created 42 new files and just messed up the entire code base. I don't think it's very useful yet, but I can see where things are going in the next coming years with this new feature. I don't know how your experience has been, Daniel.
42 new files. That's wild.
Yeah.
No, I haven't tried it. The fact that it had access to the to run commands scared me, and I just didn't want to trust it to do that. And I didn't want to take the time to like learn how to sandbox it or something. So yeah.
It's also like same thoughts, like RMRF/ oops, too bad.
That's right.
Yeah.
Or like, this is the wrong prefix. I wanted to remove the component.
there's a checkbox that says disallow, removing files. So they
okay.
built that in
Oh.
to it, so it's a little safer.
And it
Okay.
can only execute some malicious things. That's good. No removal,
Yeah,
at least.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But at least that's a good way to like make sure that not everything is lost accidentally. Like, oh yeah, the Git folder is not gone. Too bad.
Yeah.
But I mean, it also fits in a way what you two of you described with like, okay, AI is useful if you have this supervision, if you check your code. I think maybe that also comes pretty nicely in with another point, which is what is your best tip or advice for like other developers doing AI assisted development in Vue.js specifically? Besides, of course, check what the output is.
I would say just just take it in small chunks. And we kind of already said that, right? Don't try to do everything at one time. And this is going to be the most helpful thing. Remember, you're still the brain in the operation. It's just helping.
Yep. I agree. My advice would be use Cursor's documentation feature. It's basically Cursor allows you to ingest both local and online documentation of your favorite framework or an obscure plugin that nobody's ever heard of, and it basically uses that as a reference to write your code. So when I started with this, it greatly reduced the amounts of hallucinations because it uses grounded facts and documentation to write code. I think that's really useful. And yeah, I'm completely on team Claude 3.5 Sonnet. I think that's super good stuff. Yeah, and
also expensive, I heard.
Sorry?
Also expensive, I heard, or at least compared to other models.
It's quite all right nowadays. I have a Cursor subscription, $20 a month. It basically gives you 500 fast requests with Claude Sonnet, which I think, it suits me pretty well.
Yeah, I think they have so-called like premium models or a few that you can choose from, and Claude's no more than the latest OpenAI model on there.
Yeah,
so that's nice.
Yeah.
And what's also good to know is that Claude is also available within Visual Studio Copilot as of a couple of weeks ago. So if your company has a GitHub Copilot subscription, you can always switch from GPT to Claude. Yeah.
That's what I did for most of the things because I'm mainly using GitHub Copilot and VS Code, and then it's like, oh yeah, Claude, let's try. Gives better results actually, so I was really happy about that it happened.
Very good results. What I kind of dislike about the versioning of these large language models is that they kept referring to Claude 3.5 Sonnet as Claude 3.5, and then they released a new Claude 3.5, which they didn't call 3.6. They just called it 3.5 new. So make sure that you refer to the right version of Claude, which I think has a date time stamp in the model itself. So always check, because your experiences may vary depending on the model that you're using. It's sometimes confusing to in large language model land.
It also sounds a bit like versioning strategies should have been improved a little bit. I mean, we at least in software development have figured it out kind of with semantic versioning, though there are also other suggestions. But that's good to know.
What to name it.
Just ask. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
All right. There is one question. There are a lot of questions from your audience actually. So let's do something that's quite related. Because Daniel, you mentioned the extended memory, and it's about the role of documentation. It's also a fair point as the perspective of a maintainer. The question is, does the role of docs diminish? Docs get auto-generated from prompt questions, or also do people still read docs? Why can't they just use AI to figure out what the library is about, like Michael showcased in a recent video as well? What do you think about
that? The way that we create docs visually for people to ingest, I think the need for that does diminish some. Like having a website you can go to with docs that look nice, and but does your app still need documentation? Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's how you're teaching the language model about your app in a lot of ways. So in fact, that's one of the things I mentioned in my talk. And to be honest, I haven't tried it myself. It's something that this piece of advice is something I've heard from others online, is that you should ask the composer inside of Cursor to document changes for you in your app as it's as it's doing things in the composer. And so ultimately it understands English really well, right? Or whatever language. And so you definitely want to keep well-written documentation around about how your project works.
Yeah.
Not just for your sake, but for the LLM sake as well.
Yeah.
And do you think that, like, from a maintainer's perspective, couldn't you just say, okay, I have a lot of tests and the code is expressive enough? Then, like, as you just said, with like, okay, if AI generates the code, or like AI reads through the code base and generates the docs from that, do you think this will have like a similar, let's say, impact than writing the docs by hand manually right now?
I mean, I think part of it could, but imagine writing a super expressive variable name versus writing a comment. Sometimes you've got variable names that are good enough, and then you've got variable names that are precise, and a lot of those variable names that are really precise are actually a pain to write every time, right? And so I kind of see the difference there being writing things out in a comment doc style versus and capturing more of the essence of what's happening versus something that's happening in the actual code and variable names and things.
I'll say from a content creation, like technical writing standpoint, I've experimented a bit with trying to get AI to help with writing articles even, or anything like that, and it's not very good, especially compared to like really well written documentation. It just doesn't have all of the nuance that you would expect, or references to like design decisions. Like Vue, in the Vue docs, it might say, well, we did this because of this, or it'll reference another part of the documentation. And in theory, you could build a whole system that like does this all, but it's would be very complex. I think the best use is in that like question answering, like dynamic. It can answer a very, very specific question in context of like what you're doing with a specific file or whatever, but just like as general documentation of, okay, I want to learn this thing and I'm going to read through, see what it does. It's not there yet.
Yeah, I also made similar experience actually. Like, it's especially because it also doesn't have all the context. If you would have, let's say, you start a project and you feed everything into like the context window of the LLM, like here are all our transcripts from our meetings and why we did certain decisions, which no one ever have, like from years ago. Just imagine, like, Vue is almost 11-year-old framework. It's really difficult. Plus, probably also you can't even document all of that. Some people is also sadly only bound, some knowledge is only bound to certain people, as in, well, knowledge transfer needs to be done in general. And with Nuxt, it's also similar. Like, there are some decisions made in team meetings. Of course, we have recordings; they could be transcribed, but yeah, having the full context, and then also understanding what might be important for the developer itself. Not like, okay, this is how you can use it, but also maybe when you shouldn't use it. What is the danger in certain situation to maybe, I don't know, use a composable in the wrong way? It's always a classic example, like use fetch in a normal method or something. Like, making that possible, I think, is the best, that you actually, well, use the framework and then note, okay, this is a problem, and then start to generate docs with help of AI. Say, okay, hey, I want to write a certain part, some suggestions. Then you also, what you said a bit, like finding ideas, or sometimes also phrasing for the non-mother tongue English speakers.
Well, I think the limitations of the context window might be a problem that gets solved in the nearby future. I mean, when compared to GPT 3.5, which I believe had a context window of 16,000 tokens or 32,000, whereas right now we have models that are capable of handling, I think, 256,000 tokens to 1 million tokens, I think. So I think, well, the technology gets better. We can stuff more context in the context window, so to say. But for these kind of things where you like give the model a context, there's something in Cursor called .cursor rules, Maybe you guys have heard of it.
Mm-hmm.
It means that you can put all kinds of things in there that you prefer. Like, for example, I prefer the options API versus composition API. Ensure to always output options API code. Yeah, that's an example. And it's
But
not
you
limited
wouldn't
to
do that.
No, I wouldn't do that. No, there are people who might have this preference.
That's a
You
good
can also
point, yeah.
stuff all kinds of decisions in there. You're not limited to just code as a language, but you can also put normal English in there. It will help you steer the output of your code. So I think we're getting there, that we're able to stuff all kinds of things in the context, and it doesn't matter how big the context is, but we'll see.
I guess the problem is also like you have to have the information somehow, right? If it's only existing in the heads of the people, then you can not stuff it in. But that's a good point to mention, that like the size, the window size problem might be solved at some point.
Yep.
And
So-
in terms of my apologies, Michael, go ahead.
No, you have something to say. Go say it.
Well, just as far as docs are concerned, and maybe not even necessarily docs being used for a context for the AI, but just docs being useful for the developer. One of the reasons we all like TypeScript, but one of the reasons that people who like TypeScript is because it keeps you from jumping out of your IDE and to your browser to documentation as much, right? And so I think AI will allow us to remain inside of our IDEs even more, and already is, right? And so that's another way in which the importance of docs will diminish some.
Maybe that's also a good point to mention that some frameworks, for example, I know Svelte is doing that, is providing LLM-friendly documentation, just like an LLM.txt file with like, hey, this is Svelte, here's how you do things. A bit like how you could build your custom cursor rules saying, hey, this is how you use certain methods of the framework you use, but by the framework by default. So maybe that's a good segue. Say, how do you think that framework library authors have to adapt to like make libraries or frameworks adapted to make them more, say, AI friendly for like more accurate code generation, for reasoning, for just like using things?
That's a very good question.
It's difficult, right?
Yeah. It's not.
I
Really
think maybe while you're thinking about it, just to add on that, especially nowadays, AI is really good at generating React code, obviously, because it has a lot of training data on that. Given the like big React ecosystem and a lot of AI tools targeting React by default, V0, for example, has Vue support by now, but had mainly React support before. But on the other hand, we can't just say, hey, we only use the most popular tool forever now just because AI is good at it, let's say. And I mean, AI can also generate valid Nuxt and Vue and so on code. So yeah, is there something that you could think of how maintainers could improve things?
It was a while ago. I read an article written by some folks at Anthropic, the company behind Claude, and they had some suggestions to get better structured output from Claude, given a certain prompt as input, and they recommended placing structuring your prompts in XML tags, and it could be XML tags that were non-existent. For example, instructions or context. And I can't remember the name of the research paper anymore, but it mentioned that it could greatly improve the quality of the output of an LLM. So my first thought would be, when writing documentation for frameworks or libraries, place code examples in a XML tag named code example, or a discussion tag if you have a controversial take or a hot item of something. That's the only thing I can think of right now.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. I think maybe more people will even rely on the more traditional Markdown style documentation that you see on GitHub, right? And you won't have a link to a web page from the GitHub docs or README. You just expose that Markdown file easily, so you can add it to the context of your IDE's composer, and you've got a lot going for you right there, I think.
So basically, the way having it all structured, so to say, either through like XML tags, like, okay, I have my own, let's say, structured system, or, well, Markdown is also structured in a way. And not rely on fancy websites with like big animations, like here's the info as a dump for maybe the LLM to learn.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, to your point, Patrick, could have even more structure over the current, just Markdown format being headings and things like that, using XML to really tell it more semantic things. And maybe if there becomes some kind of standard around that, I don't know. That could be interesting.
Yeah.
I've seen recently, so there's this llm.txt file that's that people are trying to popularize for websites. So it's similar to like your robots.txt file where like crawlers will read that file for some information. But basically this file is like take all of the content of your website and just stuff it into a single file, and then the LLM can just go and read that. And instead of having to, parse out all of the irrelevant UI that it doesn't need to really read, then you can just put it in there. So I wonder if that combined with, well, you could make this llms.txt file structured with the XML tags and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's also what Svelte is doing, for example. They have like a system tag making it saying this is the developer documentation for, I don't know, for example, SvelteKit. And then they have Markdown for like nodes and so on. So it's a kind of a mix. It also goes in that direction.
Yeah.
But I really think like in the future, there will be some kind of like alignment at least to make things more graspable, like with less tokens and more accurate for LLMs. So that would be interesting. Okay, Michael, what else do we got question-wise?
Yeah, we have a couple questions about environmental responsibility. So I'm going to pop up this one.
Yes.
Where does the environmental responsibility intersect with our adoption of LLMs? Because we know that these LLMs, they're using tons and tons of energy, and even like Meta investing in building their own nuclear reactors and like, crazy things like that because they're just so power hungry. So how have you thought about this, or do you have any ideas on this question? A bit of an ethical or moral dilemma here.
And before you answer, AGI will solve that is not a valid answer. Not making it easy here.
I would say before you consider using AI or implementing AI in existing software or applications, try to think, do I need AI? There are these examples I see online, and it's primarily within a realm of AI LLM engineering called agentic workflows. They often give like an example of, okay, let's build an agent. It will independently and autonomously search the internet and look for the price of a certain stock on the stock exchange. Well, we have an API, maybe a couple of them around for this exact purpose. Why would you feel the need to spin up a large language model to do something that an API call can do much faster and much less prone to using power? That would be my first concern. And the second would be, try to consider using your own local large language model that you host in something called Olama. Allows you to run models locally. That way you're not dependent on some sort of third party that uses power in a way that doesn't need to. And I'm also thinking, but I don't know much about this topic, but I also read somewhere that most of the energy usage goes into training the models, like making them train on all the data that's get fed. So try to consider not training your models too much or fine-tuning them too much. But that's just an idea I have.
Well, going off of that, Patrick, the thing you mentioned about training being one of the most energy, heavy parts, the DeepSeek model, I saw someone just mention it in the comments as well. It took them far less time to train this DeepSeek model. This exploded on the internet, like Monday And they did it with graphics cards, that were extremely, they were the old stuff, right? And I imagine that uses less power as well. I'm not a hardware guy. That's above my pay grade. But yeah, I think that technology is certainly going to improve, and we're already seeing that.
Yep.
Pretty good points. And I think you're touching on two topics that we also had in mind. I mean, we can stick with DeepSeek for a little bit. Do you have a take on DeepSeek R1, on the big thing in AI recently? Well, a lot of big things, but one of the most recent ones.
I'd say DeepSeek, it's pretty impressive that you can run a reasoning model, because that's what it is, a reasoning model that is able to compete with OpenAI's flagship reasoning model, which costs, I don't know, $200 a month, I think.
And
it's
they not profit on that. They're not profitable on the $200. That's
true,
the craziest.
True. So I think it's very good for our field of work that these new innovations, which drive innovation and lower costs, are coming out. I think it's awesome that you can just run it yourself. It helps you with certain reasoning tasks. Given the Vue.js ecosystem and coding, I've tried to use it to code. I'll stick with Claude. I think it's still a bit faster. And for example, I tried to give an example, create a server route, use async data, and it just made up something with Express.js. And I'm like, yeah, it's probably not trained on Nuxt documentation, maybe briefly or not as much as GPT-4 or Claude is doing. So my experience, it's awesome that it's open source. It's awesome that you can run a reasoning model in your own house for free. But I'm not using it in something production-wise. No, I think it's not that good yet. That's my take.
Patrick, do you have any, were you interacting with it like through the chat interface, or do you have any IDE integrations with DeepSeek that work yet?
Yeah, so I implemented it in my cursor workflow using Ollama.
Okay.
You can use it to run local models. You can pull the latest large language models and then use that. So I run it in the terminal, actually. And what's interesting also is that, of course, it's a little political take, but I believe it's also a model that's censored. If you talk about certain models, certain topics, it will refuse to answer, especially in the web UI. But this is also the case with some topics that you use in OpenAI, for example. There's always some sort of censorship.
Kind of bias,
Yeah, bias, censorship, but you can circumvent this with certain jailbreaking prompts, which I think is interesting as well. So all in all, yeah, I think it's awesome that has come out and everybody can use it. But I'm not using it for anything right now. No. What about you, Daniel?
No, I honestly, I haven't tried it yet. I've heard good things, obviously, but yeah, I'd be excited to give it a whirl.
So our next question, and I think maybe our last question here as we start to wrap up, is trying to.
We still have a few, but let's find it. Yeah.
So we'll do a question on data privacy.
Yes.
So the question is, here we go.
Perfect.
We're sending all sorts of data over to these LLMs, and how do you think about privacy? Are you concerned about this at all?
So in terms of using Cursor, like there are ways to ignore certain files, prevent Cursor from sending data in certain files to the LLM altogether. And I think that's a good start, but obviously you can't hide all the files or else it's useless, right? I don't know. In terms of code, it doesn't bother me that much for the most part, because a lot of the things that we're doing, technically speaking, like people already have done, right? It's not like secret information. It's not it's just architectural stuff. But I don't know. I mean, I really haven't tried to tease out of a LLM, hey, what is this company's certain piece of software doing? I haven't tried to ask it to give me that information. I don't know. Yeah, I typically don't concern myself with it too much. I'm probably a little haphazard about it.
I guess it also depends on what you work on, so to say. I guess when you work, I don't know, on a super secret government project and they're like, yeah, all the files are sent over to, I don't know, some server, then people might be like, oh yeah, let's maybe not do that. I don't know.
Yeah.
But Patrick, what do you think?
Well, I know for a fact I have a couple of colleagues who work at a financial institution here in Holland, and they have a policy of not letting their engineers work with AI coding. As a matter of fact, everything is blocked from OpenAI. Not even ChatGPT can be used. So they are they have to use local coding models, which you can also pull with Olama. They were quite great. You have CodeLlama, made by Meta, works pretty okay-ish. There's a Chinese model, Quen, which works also really well with coding. And another aspect of ensuring privacy is that you can also run your local large language models. They are not connected to the internet. Your data does not get sent to a server. Everything stays on your laptop, even without any internet. So that would be a good way to mitigate this issue. Yeah.
I guess it also applies if we think about things beyond coding, like applications, including AI dealing with sensitive data, be it like, I don't know, medical data, whatnot, then that would also be a valid way to do that.
Yeah, certainly. One thing you could also check out if you're not too technical, if you haven't worked with Olama, if you can't work with it yet, there's this thing called the Web LLM project. It's very, very much work in progress, but what it does is it allows you to basically pull a Llama model in the browser cache and run a large language model within your browser. And when I tried that for the first time, I was like, my mind was blown. Like, you don't need any internet. The model gets cached in your browser cache. You can just run a local large language model within your browser. I also think that's the future where we're headed, like smaller, optimized language models that are very good at one particular task. Google is doing some experiments with this AI API which runs in the browser. I think that is a way that we can tackle privacy issues in the nearby future. Yeah.
Yeah, the Web LLM thing is very interesting. I'll have to check that out a bit more.
Yeah, do it.
I mean, that's just the start as well. As I said, like, it's very much in development, and I guess there are a lot of things coming. No matter if, like, okay, decrease the size while keeping the same, reasoning capabilities. Versus running them. And I think especially given that, I mean, I'm living in the EU, Patrick, you as well. I'm German, so we're the land of the GDPR, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But well, let's not get into that. The main point is that a lot of companies are very much privacy focused. And I mean, that, like, for them, having a solution just like, hey, okay, you want to use AI for internal things, here you can do it is a really good way, especially governmental, like near government organizations, or just people saying like, okay, I don't want to leak anything to any service outside. Sweet. Okay, we're slowly nearing the end, but we can do one more lovely question. And maybe it would be great to cycle real quick back. We talked a little bit about that, but the job market. I think the dev job market is in general like not that easy right now, and hasn't been the last year, a couple of years. But the question is, do you think AI will reduce the gap in the programming job market, or we briefly touched on that, like, will it increase the demand for other IT roles? Will, like, people search less for front-end developers, but more like for people using AI? What's your take on that?
I think we're looking at two processes that run in parallel. I think on one hand, the tech market is quite bad in general. I mean, I'm speaking for Europe. It aren't the golden days anymore. I remember like 2-3 years ago during COVID, when a lot of companies had much more money. So that has dried up a little bit in Europe. So it's getting a bit tougher to stand out from other software engineers on the market. I think AI also has a role in convincing companies that you might not need as much software engineers because they can do everything with AI. I think that's the premise that many companies are now seeing in Europe.
Or even worse, the project managers say, hey, we can do everything with ChatGPT, and then you need people to fix that.
Yeah. Like, oh, I saw a TikTok reel. It said you can make a website with ChatGPT. Why would I need you? Well, will not be the case. But just like I said earlier, I think there will be a demand for other IT roles, which could be the AI engineer who's going to work and implement with all these large language models. There will be software engineers, front-end engineers who might need to implement and integrate large language models or fine-tune data, create a data ingestion pipeline. I think there are more possibilities rising right now due to the AI hype and boom.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's definitely going to, create as many jobs, I think, as it takes. They're just going to look a little bit different. And honestly, as developers, we're poised in a very good position to take a lot of those positions because of the knowledge that we have.
Yeah.
Great. I think that's a really good end word here for everybody who might be concerned that, as we said before, nobody will lose their jobs. It might just be different. And maybe there will also be some new roles out there as well. Patrick, Daniel, thank you so much for joining this lovely panel. Could you very briefly, just like in 1 or 2 sentences, say, where can people find you or follow you, just so people know that?
So I'm on Twitter at DanielKellyIO. GitHub is, I might mention there's an underscore between Daniel Kelly and IO. It's on my tag there. But that's mostly where I'm at.
Yeah.
And of course, I am. My apologies, Patrick. Of course, I'm with Vue School, and so vueschool.io. Definitely come there for. We've got some AI training and stuff there as well.
Awesome. Yeah, you can find me on X or Twitter under regex parser, or if that's too hard, you can look for Patrick the LLM engineer. And I'm also on LinkedIn with my full name. You can find me there. There's only one Patrick van Everdingen, so you'll find
the only one.
The only one.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And that's almost the end of the show. Thank you so much, Vue.js Nation, for giving us the chance to talk a bit about AI and Vue and how the future might look like. Thanks once again to our wonderful panelists. Also, make sure to subscribe to join to next year's event, right? Vue.js Nation 2026 at vuejsnation.com. And Michael, you got something else for us, which comes up
there's
very soon.
Also Front End Nation, which is coming up in later this year. June, yeah.
Everybody, June.
Oh, you can go. You can go sign up for that. There's the website is frontendnation.com. You can go check that out.
Yeah, and if you want to hear more about Deja Vu, check out the latest episodes. We have them on YouTube and on your favorite podcast platform, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Google Podcasts is dead, so not there anymore. Wherever you want to listen to, for example, we talked about our 2025 predictions with Daniel Rowe, who's speaking later today. So shout out to him. And also with Justin Schrader about FormKit and a bit more AI. Definitely check it out. Still muted, Jen?
Always muted. I'm always muted. It's the best part about emceeing a conference is I'm always muted. Yes, definitely go check everybody out, especially like Deja Vu. But how do they follow Michael? How do they follow you, Michael and Alex, if they want to take a look at your work as well?
Yeah, Michael Thiessen at Michael Thiessen on all of the platforms, or michaelnthiessen.com.
Perfect. Yeah, for me, it's at the Alex Lichter, who is also shown in the video on X, on YouTube, Twitch, GitHub by now as well, and thealexlichter.com on Blue Sky. And of course, Deja Vu at Deja Vu FM or at dejavu.fm or the website dejavu.fm. And check us out and watch all the lovely episodes. We have like 44, 45 going on, so time to catch up if you didn't yet.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. This was a wonderful panel. Thank you again.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, y'all. Up next, we have a quick video, and then we will have Mark here. So see you back shortly.
Are you ready?
All right. Up next, we have Mark Noonan, maintaining accessibility in Vue components. And stoked about this because we always need to talk about accessibility. Mark is a developer turned product manager focused on accessibility at Cypress.io. His previous background in front end development, mostly Vue, in agency and enterprise context. And before that, he spent many years in developmental disability support at an Atlanta nonprofit, People Making Progress. Stoked to hear from Mark. Welcome to the stage.
Hey, everybody. Thank you very much for that introduction. I think that covered what you need to know about me. Background is web development, accessibility, like in kind of real world contexts, and then moved into product management on an accessibility product. So this is a lightning talk, and we're going to try to touch on a lot of different topics related to accessibility, maybe give you some more resources to dig into if you're not so familiar with it. And generally, make sure you're aware of the context you might need as a front-end developer working in Vue. So let's dive right into it. So first of all, if you are new to accessibility, the way I like to explain it is as a way of thinking about the web that prioritizes the needs of people with disabilities. This is slightly different than some of the other definitions you might see out there, but really absorbing that when we think about basically anything on the web, the question in the back of our minds should be, how is this usable by people who don't necessarily use a mouse or look at the page visually to understand what's there? And if we can get that way into the back of our thinking about everything we build, accessibility kind of flows naturally from that. And there's a lot of good things that come with that as well. Accessibility is also just a way to talk about the technical process of designing and developing high-quality software that meets those needs. So we roll it into the quality process, and we think of good front-end code as being accessible code for various reasons. But focusing again on the actual people at the other side of it is the easiest way to gain clarity about the front end and what to do to make something accessible. And lastly, this is an ongoing effort. You're not going to find a silver bullet or something like a component library or anything that magically fixes it in one single project or transition. Accessibility is something that you're going to deal with kind of on an ongoing basis if you want to be successful maintaining an accessible experience. One of the big things that's happening with accessibility right now is the European Accessibility Act. This is coming into law in June, and this is something that's making a lot of companies who didn't think about accessibility in their work before start to take it more seriously and look at what they can do. Here's what it looks like. It is a long legal document, no big surprises there. And what it does is creates these obligations for member countries of the EU to create accessibility-related legislation. In the last session, like the GDPR kind of came up, this regulation that introduced globally a much bigger presence of privacy notifications, agreements, cookie banners, all of those things that kind of grew up in the last 5 or 10 years since the GDPR was introduced. To me, that's the most similar impact in recent memory of what we're expecting with the European Accessibility Act, where the European Accessibility Act is actually going to affect a lot of companies internationally simply by doing business with consumers within the EU. This is just an example of what the GDPR used to do. So the enforcement of the European Accessibility Act is really interesting. It is up to the member countries to decide how to do it. In my home country, which is Ireland, the fines can go up to $60,000 or 60,000 euros and include prison time. So officers of companies who are continuously failing to comply with accessibility criteria are liable to experience like jail time for not doing what they need to do. On the other hand, the defense for this is diligence. It's taking precautions to make sure what you're shipping is accessible and functional for people with disabilities and creates an equal experience. The goal here is not perfection. The goal is just to be making something good enough to be credible and seriously usable independently by people with disabilities. You will always have small areas of non-compliance and things that ship and don't work and require feedback. And being engaged in that feedback and making an effort, at least most of the time, seems to be enough to comply with these laws. So you want to hit that standard and reach a really good level. I'd add that I'm not a lawyer. What you should do if you're looking at this and going like, does this apply to me as a front-end developer? Ask your legal and compliance people if this affects you. If you have customers in the EU that are not like B2B customers, this seems to be, for a lot of the companies I talk to, that the trigger for having an effect of the Accessibility Act. So it covers quite a lot of like e-commerce type businesses. So let's talk about like how you can do something about accessibility in your Vue components. And the reason to think about this is often the way you find out about accessibility is not someone talking to you at a conference or teaching you in how they teach web development. It is somebody walks around your office holding a demand letter they've received, and they're like, where are these highly paid professional front-end developers who are writing HTML that is causing us to be sued? That's the kind of consequence of not being accessible when the company does not take it seriously and somebody has trouble completing workflows independently that they're supposed to be entitled to do by law and things like that. So we don't want that demand letter. We want to be able to say what we ship as front-end developers is high quality professional grade code and that it's functional for disabled users by default. The reason this is important is a lot of accessibility problems happen accidentally when the code and the content just don't agree with each other in some important way. And there's a few different aspects to how you might think of what's matching and not matching. We'll get into one or two examples before the end of the talk. But this is the root of it. It matters what HTML we ship to users because browsers use that HTML to create accessible experiences for assistive technology users. Here's a classic example. You probably
All right. I'm not sure if Mark can hear us. It looks like he froze. Give him a bit. See if he'll come back. I can tell you as someone that have internet issues earlier, we all have them. They're, technology. It's one of our best friends and also can be our arch nemesis. So thank you for bearing with us while we work on figuring that out. Let me see while I'm working if we have a Mighty Byte video or something we can play for you. In the meantime, just for everybody right now, I'm curious of what your drink of choice is, the time of day where you're at, because it's morning for me. It's about 11:30 in the morning, and I've had an energy drink and coffee, so and tea. Wow, I've lots of caffeine this morning. So yay, Mark is back. Mark.
hello. Yeah, are we
Hey,
good?
Mark. It looks like you're breaking up a bit. Could you turn off your camera? See if that works. Mark, can you hear
internet
us?
at this exact moment, which is bad.
It looks like we can hear you a bit better, which I can turn off my video. So hopefully that helps you. Can you try sharing your screen and we'll see if we can hear the rest of your presentation?
Yeah, so we're
Perfect.
sharing here. Is this functional?
I believe so. Great. We look forward to hearing the rest of your talk. Thanks, Mark.
We will do our best. The slides are online as well. But I think maybe where we cut out was around here, just explaining the HTML that we create. You can see on the left here is the button image. And that causes the problem with the stream technology, like assistive technology like a screen here. A solution to this is add an ARIA label attribute in HTML that will create an accessible name for this button in the browser's accessibility tree that will then be available to technologies. You don't have every single thing like that. You have to understand how to make an accessibility tree. A lot of experience to turn it well. It's not going to be perfect. As a Vue developer, there are component libraries address accessibility and documentation. So Vuetify, Prime Vue, and Core UI were three that I just took a brief look at. These are all useful things to look at. And when you pick a component library or something, you should investigate the accessibility of that library. It is a great advantage to be starting with an accessible component library or one that's at least trying to be accessible. So understanding those capabilities of what you're using is a lot easier than reinventing the wheel, especially if you're new to it. The only thing I would caution you to do is don't transfer the accountability around accessibility to a third party. You still own the experience your users have, so you should still understand and test for accessibility. The reason this is hard to test for and maintain, which is kind of the topic here, is that code is always changing. Each change to the code can have ripple effects that affect accessibility. And so you might not know the accessibility effect. Accessibility issues, the ones that
Hey, Mark, do you have another Wi-Fi or internet that you could attach to?
It's built on top of an inaccessible foundation, which is a problem. And we shift accessibility testing left, which is kind of in the QA shift left movement. We want developers at getting accessibility feedback in component tests and end-to-end tests that run before code is merged, and generally get the feedback as early as you can so that you can correct accessibility issues. So how do we keep those things? If we've done everything correctly and we've built an accessible application, how are we going to achieve that maintenance? Accessibility automation is like a lot of other standards-based things where a Swiss cheese approach can help catch all of the issues, even though no one layer is going to perfectly do things. And eventually, like you see here, some issues are going to make it into production. For accessibility, these are the main forms of accessibility testing that you could do. You can have things that directly monitor production environments. You can go all the way from that layer into CodeLint in your editor. That's like, hey, you create an image called attribute. I'm going to give you a little red squiggly right before you commit that code. The thing I'm kind of interested in, from writing a lot about these in the Cypress docs, if you want to check those out, is how we use accessibility in kind of standard automation tests in Cypress or any other particular testing framework. This sort of library that I'm going to talk about is Axe Core, and this gives you accessibility checks where you don't do anything special except run this library to get a lot of accessibility feedback. And we're kind of here, so I don't want to spend too much in the weeds of Axe Core, but it is part of Lighthouse. If you've ever seen an accessibility score from Lighthouse, that's based on a partial set of Axe Core rules. It's very popular. We use it at Cypress. It's also in a bunch of Cypress open source packages. And the idea is that mismatch of code and content can be detected in a very passive automated scan, because we can see things like you have a list element, but there's no list items inside it. There's other random children. We've got headings that are all the wrong order for someone to intelligently skim through a page when just listening to all the headings announced. There's all these types of things that are easy to detect. It covers about the criteria that we look at. And these 30% have a lot of serious problems, so it's really good to catch them early. Even you will still need some form of manual testing to get a comprehensive understanding of accessibility. Your authority on whether something is accessible is always going to be your disabled users, and are they able to complete workflows and understand your application. One example of a result you get from automation testing is bucket. Accessible, but most of the content here, like and all that, is in the actual library, just as you would use it in any way.
Hey, Mark, are you able to hear me?
A report about form fields missing labels. This form field over here, some warnings present in the accessibility report. In this example, it's just a pull request that I reorganize the design so the labels are no longer inside the field, they're outside the field. As we go through and debug, we see it visually looks correct, and it has a label.
All right. Well, you caught me in the background playing with the Rubik's Cube, because that's what I do when my camera's off. We'll see if we can get Mark's video, or a video of Mark's talk out later on. So for now, we will move on with next steps and hopefully be able to get that information later, because it's definitely interesting. So up next, we have Mastering Nuxt. Did you know that the Mastering Nuxt course is completely hands-on? You will learn to build a complete online course platform, including a database and a blazing fast landing page to sell the course, utilizing technologies like Vue.js, Nuxt 3, and Vue.js. Only on the Mastering Nuxt website can you find the Super Bundle. Why did we call it the Super Bundle? Because it contains 4 masterclass courses, Vue.js masterclass courses for options and composition APIs, as well as Nuxt 2 and Nuxt 3 masterclasses, all for a massive discount. And don't forget that if you buy Nuxt 3 now, you'll be able to get the Nuxt 4 update at no cost to you, kind of like a 2-for-1 sale. The Mastering Nuxt course is now available for 30% off only during the conference. So go check that out at masteringnuxt.com. And up next, we have Alvaro. Shiny, pretty post-processed Trace.js effects for jaw-dropping visuals. Alvaro is a creative software engineer from Barcelona, Spain. He is the developer relations engineer at Storyblock and the author of Trace.js. He produces creative content and contributes to open source, mainly related to front-end, Vue, Nuxt, Astro, and 3D, Blender, and Three.js. Welcome to the stage, Alvaro.
Hello, everyone. I hope I'm audible, and hello to all that have been in the conference today. Thank you, Vue.js Nation, for having me again and letting me show a lot of cool 3D stuff made with Vue to the audience. So here I have a little what's game that is completely done in Vue, believe it or not. And it has some cool effects like the lasers and all the glowing, etc. It's like a space theme kind of game. And it's using as well like the library that we are going to talk today. So let me get back to my slides. Of course, I'm using a slide deck for the win. So I present to you today shiny, pretty, and post-processed 3GS effects for jaw-dropping visuals. My name is Álvaro Sabu. I'm a developer experience engineer at Storyblog, living in Barcelona, Spain, but originally from Venezuela. Creating a lot of content. Well, I used to on my YouTube channel when I had time. My portfolio that is never finished, you can see it at alvarosaburido.dev, and you can always say hi on my socials. So, what is post-processing? Cute little glitched cat. So, this is how a 3D scene could look like without post-processing. And this is how it can be seen with post-processing. If the recording and also the streaming goes well, you will see that it glows and also it has some glitches in the way. By the way, these are two 3D scenes completely live on the slide deck. So what is post-processing? Post-processing is a technique that consists in adding effects to the final render or the final image of a scene, okay? But it's often used actually in filmmaking and gaming. But we can use it in web too. It's the same concept. So, for example, this movie, I think it's Blade Runner, has a lot of like post-processing and color grading. So how this magic works? We have our 3D scene made with Trace.js, 3.js, and Vue. Then the effect composer, which is the component responsible of that, will take one of the images, okay, one of the snapshots of the scene, and will create something that is called the render pass. Then it will add another effect to it. So the next frame is going to have this effect of bloom. Bloom is when it glows, okay? And then we can add another effect, which could be recoloring or changing the hue and the saturation of the image. With that, we have a final output that is what the users see on the 3D scene. Cool. Why will I do that? So there are a couple of reasons, mostly separation of concerns. So you have a process in the main pass, and then you have your after effects. For performance, because this is only going to apply to the final render. So you are not creating these effects live on the scene with 3ds. You're doing it on the final snapshot. It's like a more like image processing kind of thing. And of course, you have a lot of artistic control. We can apply more effects that we could do in the normal pipeline, let's say. Okay, cool. So how does post-processing look in Trace.js? Quick recap about Trace.js. Trace.js is a Vue custom renderer that allows you to create 3D scenes declaratively. So as you will do with Vue components and composals, okay? Trace is the word for 3ds on Spanish because, yeah, I'm Venezuelan, so it makes sense. And this is the website. Here you can see the dogs and yeah, get to know a little bit more. Probably later I'm gonna share, stay a little bit more in the chat so I can share the links there, okay? For now, I'm just gonna move on. If you wanna get started, you can install it in your package manager of choice by using pnpm add Trace.js core and also using tree as a pure dependency. Or you can play in our playground, which is a nice like live coding thing that we have, like single file components similar to the one that Vue have. And you can experiment with Vue right away here, okay? So let's build our first 3D scene because I know that 3D is still relatively unknown topic in Vue development. So let's add the Trace canvas, which is the main component that will render the scene in a canvas from the core package. So we import it here and we add it to our template. We can select also some props, for example, to make it visible on the whole window. Then we are going to create a subcomponent because it's a good practice to dividing components, right? And we are going to create it inside of it. It's called the experience. But what does the experience that Vue has? It's also a template, and we're going to add a perspective camera. So any 3GS class that you have in 3GS, if you prefix it the word tres, it's gonna be available as a component. And all the setters, all the properties are gonna be props. So we can add a camera, and we're gonna add something simple. We're gonna add a sphere that has a hot pink color, like we saw in the beginning. Then we're gonna add some light to be able to see something in the scene. And voila, we have our first scene ever. So congratulations to you, clap in the back, you did your first 3D. What about the post-processing part, right? Because I showed you the sphere, now let's add some of the cool effects that we saw at the beginning with the spaceship, right? So because it can be a little bit tough to implement those by hand, we created a package that enables the DX in another level. So it will be the same declarative style that you will achieve with Tres.js, but also apply it to the effects. So we launched relatively like last year, I think, but it has increased onto version 2 right now, is the post-processing effect composer. Same documentation, you can take a look at it afterwards. I'm gonna go to the second screen and explain a little bit how the package works. So we have two kind of effects. We have effects from 3GS. So it's based on all the examples of post-processing that 3GS documentation has that are available with 3D add-ons. And then we have some special effects that are from Poimandres, which is an organization that created React 3 Fiber. They have been innovating a lot, and they create an ecosystem to make 3GS easy for frameworks. So we're going to use one of their libraries who create new classes for post-processing effects. So to use the native 3GS ones, we just need to import the effect composer and one of the effects that we want to use from Tres.js post-processing. And then along with our Tres canvas, along with the scene, we are going to add a suspense because it's an asynchronous operation. We need suspense. We're going to add the effect composer, and inside of it, we're going to pass our passes or effects. Same DX, we're going to have the properties as props. So to be able to see the bloom, we need to change a little bit our sphere, or at least the material of the sphere. And we need to add something called emissive. So this is the intensity that we want that material to emit light. Okay, and we also need to say what color do we want to emit. Once we have that, this is how it looks with the 3GS native effects. It glows. Okay, so let's see Poimandres effects. Same concept, but all the Poimandres effects are available with the suffix Poimandres. So to differentiate the types and the components, we added to all the components like related to it the suffix of Poimandres. Okay, so it was gonna be the same DX. You have your scene, and then you add a suspense with the effect composer and the bloom. Okay, the bloom in Poimandres is called different. It's not Unreal because it's not based on how Unreal Engine does it. It's a different implementation, and you will see why. So if you add that one, you're gonna see a different result, but it also glows. So we achieve something nice here. If we have a pair comparison between the two effects, we can notice that there are some difference, right? Personally, I like more the Poimandres effect because it's more subtle. Here you have a little bit more exposure on terms of the lighting and the difference between the halo and the rest. This is a little bit more subtle. And of course, the props change. So you might be wondering, like, which one I choose? I will say choose the one that you like the most, as always. So if you like more the effect or the visual effect that the Poimandres does, use the Poimandres ones. There is no better or worse, okay? So I'm really happy to announce that we just released version 2.1 to 0. I had to do the Twitter announcement. I forgot about it. I had to do it after this, but it's already in GitHub. Okay. And what is exciting is that it adds 13 new effects available. Thanks to Tino and Damien for leading this. Tino is the leader of the owner of post-processing, and Damien just joined and add a ton of new effects, super cool, that I'm going to showcase in a little bit. So we have things like variable Kuwahara, I don't know how to pronounce that, dot screen length distortion, and more. But let's go to my favorite part, because of course I have my favorites. So I want to showcase some of them to you. This is the variable point address effect. And I really like this one because it gives like a really weird shiny effect. This is a metallic object, and we can play around with it and like change the amount. So this is gonna be like without effect. And then we can increase it and distort it completely. And we can also offset like in the x-axis and the y-axis, which is kind of cool. You can also change like, well, you cannot see the drop down, but you can change the blending mode. Similar like how Photoshop or any software works with the blending modes, like Blender as well. You can play with that. This is one of my favorites. So this is Kuwahara. I write it wrong, but it's watercolor actually. Okay, it adds a watercolor effect to your scene. So let me move around. Okay, you can probably see here. This demo is by Damien, so it's really nice. You can change the radius, so how strong the effect is gonna be. You can even play with this and animate it so it looks live, like a I don't know, like a movie. Okay. Be aware that the more radius and sector count you play with, the lower the performance is going to be, because it's really difficult to calculate this. So be aware of that when you use it. This one is pretty cool. If you ever read comics or you see this effect in movies, this is like a dot screen kind of effect, where you see some, the shadows, like the shadows and the midpoints as dots. So we can change the angle of them and even the size of them, which is kind of cool. And you can see this pretty performant, because I think that this is a 3D scene with the controller inside of a slide dev, while I'm live casting this through the system. So it is working quite well. Then we have another one that I love, is the pixelation effect. So same demo, but if I enable it, now everything is pixel art. You can change the amount of pixels, so how defined it is, which is a cool technique that some video games use to make things 3D look like pixel art. What else do we have? Oh yeah, fine, but not least, we have this scanline effect that simulates all monitors. This is kind of cool when you do it inside of a TV. You're doing the modeling of 3D, and you add it inside. You can change the density, so how many lines do you have, opacity, you name it. There are so many stuff, and this is only like 4 or 5 of the new ones that are available. I haven't played with them all. So you can thank Damien for that. I don't know how with time, but let's start wrapping up. What's next for you? So give Tres and Tres post processing a try. I would love to see more people playing with Vue playing with 3D in Vue. That's what we are here for. And if you create some scene, please share it with us. I'm more than like happy to share it on the socials. And also we have a Discord channel where you can, get some insights from other people that is creating cool projects. If you also a Vue developer and you want to contribute, please, we need contributors to make more things like this. And talking about contributors, this library and all the sub packages are only possible because contributors help us make it happen. So a big shout out to all of them. I don't know if this is updated. It pretty much is, but I would love to see your face here. And also another way that you can support us is by GitHub sponsors, because it's really cool to be able to afford coffee, right? So please send your coffees to the team so we can continue doing some 3D. And thank you for everyone that is already contributing to us. Thank you very much. And that's all for my side today.
All right. Thank you, Alvaro. It looks like we have 2 questions for you. That's all we'll have time for today is there a plan to support .usd files on Trust.js?
If I'm correct, USD files is a kind of format for objects. So it's probably possible that you already can do it. You can hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay. So I saw a message. So it's possible that it's already possible if you pass the USD loader. I think somebody in the Discord channel already asked for this. So ping me there, and I will ping you to the correct documentation. We don't have a specific USD loader as abstraction in CentOS, but maybe it will be nice to have it.
All right. And last question will complex 3D renderings require a lot of resources from the client browser?
With every iteration, it requires less. Of course, we're talking about 3D, same as in animations in the browser. You need to be mindful about performance and how many things you're rendering. But yeah, we have some cases of really complex 3D scene renderings and models. You need to take care of the optimization, of course. The more optimized is same as games. They need to optimize resources, right? So it's also something that you will do with a normal website, that you optimize the resources so the score is good and the user experience is great. Similar concept to 3D. There is another render that is in the making, which is a web GPU, which uses a different, it's not WebGL, that has amazing benchmark results. That's the future. We're still not supported. We have a PR open for support, but we are going to wait for it to be more stable to offer it. But yeah, you can do pretty cool stuff in web. I will invite you to go to the Discord channel and see the showcases, because there are really complex ones there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, Alvaro. Always good to see your talks. Thank you. All right, y'all. We are going to see if we can get Mark's internet to be nice to us. So fingers crossed that Mark's internet agrees to let him do his talk, because it was definitely interesting about accessibility. Welcome to the stage, Mark.
Hello, everybody. Okay, we're back. I'm not going to start this presentation over again from the very beginning, but just to recap, in case some people did come and go in between, we talked about accessibility as being related to how we make applications that function for disabled users, so somebody who's blind and using a screen reader, any other type of disability that affects the way you use the internet. How do we build software that is going to work for them? And then we mentioned the reason that this is becoming so top of mind for lots of companies right now is the the European Accessibility Act, which goes into force in June this year. It's going to cause a lot of companies to begin to have accessibility obligations, at least compliance-wise, that they didn't have before. So where we kind of started to trail off in the last attempt at this talk was getting into what does this mean for you as a Vue developer? So we had covered a little bit of the general premise that accessibility problems happen when the code and the content don't really match up. So you're seeing one thing on the screen, but it's not reflected at all in the HTML structure, or you can only use things with the mouse, but not with the keyboard, because the HTML is not supporting those interactions. The underlying idea here is that it matters what HTML we ship to users in our component. And then I think this is where the audio began to fall apart. This example is a classic of a button that's missing discernible text. So in this case, there's no label for anybody to understand this button other than visually. It's just a thumbs up SVG icon. The way that this affects accessibility is the browser's accessibility tree. This is the API that every assistive technology can use to pick up a version of your web page that's translatable into Braille and into voice for screen readers, or can respond to a voice control command, like telling your interface to like this button, something like that. So this core aspect of like, how are we making the HTML good enough that the browser can make an accessibility tree that makes sense? This is a part of what we're doing when we create Vue components and we make pieces of the UI. There's a number of solutions to any accessibility problem. In this case, the ARIA label is an attribute you can add to the element that will provide a non-visual label that the browser will build into the accessibility tree. So that gives somebody who's listening to this be described a sense of what happens with the button. Without this attribute, there's no knowing for them what could possibly take place when you press the button. It could do something really important. It could delete their whole account. It's very frustrating and confusing to have interfaces where buttons are not labeled, and makes the experience one where the person using it has to ask for help from somebody else to complete a task, which is not the experience you want users to have. Independence is like core to all of us. So there are some Vue component libraries that ship with accessibility in mind. And so Vuetify, Prime Vue, and Core UI are ones I looked at this morning that have accessibility kind of statements and documentation on their website. They explain how they're exposing things you can use to influence the accessibility tree, like slots and things like that, to provide the appropriate names and labels for everything. And they also explain some limitations around what a library can do for you versus what you have to own yourself, like how you use it, how you nest the components, and things like that. All libraries are going to ship with some accessibility flaws as well. It's very hard to completely crush everything. And so the thing I would advise people to do if you're making things in Vue using something like this is don't count on the fact that it's an accessible library to produce an accessible experience 100% of the time. It's great that there's this head start that these developers that make these things have shipped with accessibility in mind, but your accountability for what your users experience still lies with you. There's a lot of reasons that code is hard, or accessibility is hard, mainly because code changes so much and you don't always predict the ripple effects. So accessibility problems can happen in ways that quickly kind of pile on top of each other, and unpacking multiple things that are built in an inaccessible way and are all interrelated can be a big project. Accessibility is easier and better and faster to do if we move it to the left of the development cycle, into development, into early component testing, into end-to-end testing. These are the ways that we can approach accessibility and fix issues as fast as possible without them becoming load-bearing and complex production issues that you have to make a whole project to fix. So testing, component testing, end-to-end testing are important pieces of the puzzle, like how we detect and fix accessibility problems. The approach that many organizations take is really kind of a Swiss cheese approach. There's browser extensions, there's production monitoring, there is linters and things like that in the code. And so you can test accessibility for some things right there with little red squiggly lines in your editor, with extensions to your code editor that do that. You can also set something to scan your website every week or two and try to crawl through some things to see what's happening in production. And then maybe most relevant for people who are writing code and tests is this set in here, where we use libraries to help us do big accessibility checks. I've been writing and thinking a lot about this for the last year. So in the Cypress docs, we have kind of every angle on this that I've been able to think of already. But the one to introduce you today is this package called Axe Core, which is able to do accessibility checks that are just taking place in an end-to-end or a component test that will check the DOM at that moment in time. So here we had Axe Core by DQ Systems. This is the library that's used. If you've ever seen Lighthouse produce an accessibility score, this is under the hood what's happening in Lighthouse. We use it at Cypress in our kind of paid products, and it's also in a bunch of accessibility testing plugins that you can use, like Cypress Axe. You've probably heard of this if you've touched on accessibility at all as a developer, but if you're brand new to it, this is the idea. Pardon me just a second here. Great. So the idea of what Xcore can do is what static analysis can check for. And in this case, static analysis can look at about 30% of these web content accessibility guidelines. And I know we're going fast and I'm throwing out a lot of terminology, so there is resources at the end of this. So that will explain some of these things in more detail. But if you look at those criteria that tell us, is an experience accessible, we can detect a lot of important failures of those criteria with something like Xcore. This is just an example now of how automation might surface an issue for accessibility and the kind of debugging workflow you would do. So again, if this is a sort of new topic for you, you can expect the cycle I'm showing here to be something you would go through multiple times in multiple different ways with different issues that might get surfaced. What we're seeing at a glance, though, is the information about form fields having missing labels. So in this report, which is the Xcore report in Cypress Cloud, but it's the same as the type of information you would get in other ways, we see two issues are failing here related to the username and password field not having labels. So how do we debug this? They look like they have labels. I might have made a pull request to just move the labels around. So we're going to understand, how did moving those labels around break accessibility? What does it even matter? Visually, we inspect the element and it looks okay. So what's the report about? I'm showing here a way to print the element to the console, but the idea is really just to get into DevTools. All of your browsers have accessibility tree information in them at this point. So you should be able to look at the accessibility tree based on this part of the DOM and open that up. It's in the area of your DevTools where the styles are and all that sort of thing. It's usually the last option in Chrome, for example, under here. But the purpose of getting in here is to understand what's actually making its way through to this part of the browser that users could depend on. And you can see various other aspects of accessibility are called out here. So understanding there's really no name, just like the violation might have said, hey, we're missing a label. Okay, I'm on a text box, it has no name. You can understand you need some way to wire these things up to make it make sense. When we inspect the label, as you look at a result from something like Xcore, there's always a lot more information in the related links to DQ University. They're the makers of Xcore. And that would tell you that one way to wire up a label is to use the for attribute between the label and the form field. So if we added that in just to the label itself, because the form field has the ID of username, what we should see in the browser DevTools is that we see the name populated in here. This is a really good debugging workflow if you're like me and you usually use DevTools for CSS bugs and stuff like that. When somebody reports an accessibility issue, you can immediately be like, let me fool around in DevTools and see what I can get to happen to fix the problem. That's the core workflow that will help you dive in and quickly understand, is the accessibility issue real, what's happening, and experiment, and then see live results in there. So I'd recommend this no matter how you're doing your testing to be able to get into the DevTools like that. In this case, fixing that type of attribute would produce now a fully passing report that we see on the bottom. And my takeaways from this is that form fields are really important. If you're looking at this and going, I'm not sure the label matters that much, a lot of our important business functions and websites go through forms. So if somebody can't sign up, if they can't contact you, if they can't give you money because your interface is not accessible, there's really tangible effects to that. And the most important one to me is they can't contact you to tell you they're not having a good time with accessibility. So if you have working forms and a broadly accessible experience, you can receive feedback from real users about how to get more accessible. I have a few thoughts to wrap up here. This is such a kind of whistle-stop tour through various accessibility concepts. I would say the most important thing is to focus on the user. Getting that feedback is the absolute gold standard. When you are looking at automation, you want to catch problems that are suitable to catch with automation, like that layer in your Swiss cheese approach. There's a bunch of things you can learn in response to any given accessibility issue. And one thing I've found with a lot of the people that I've worked with on accessibility is you might see an issue in your Xcore report or your Lighthouse report that says buttons must have discernible text. And what you really want to do is just put a Band-Aid on and fix that issue and move on. But often what you experience is that indicates that that whole area could use more attention. So that's where you might focus your manual testing, get a screen reader out and see what the experience is, look at the overall accessibility tree. Because if we didn't do the things that Axe Core catches, it's likely we didn't do the more sophisticated stuff that requires a human judgment to catch. There's a lot of different resources here. The first two, I just want to take a second to go through them, and then I think we'll be done with the presentation and can switch back to your normal programming and get some questions in as well if we have time. This How a Screen Reader User Surfs the Web is a really eye-opening video of just like, okay, when you use a screen reader, you're skimming headings, you're checking all the links on the page, you're doing all sorts of non-linear stuff that you might not think of if you're used to imagining the accessibility experience as kind of working through the document. Actually comes at it from many different angles. Next is the Homer Gaines article. This is a really simple, straightforward introduction to accessibility principles of the foundation principles: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, that drive all the accessibility criteria. Next, there's the Vue docs, and there's also this Pay What You Want ebook called Accessible Vue that has a bunch of patterns that might be interesting to you, and you can just browse that on the website to get a sense of what's in there. It addresses a bunch of different, how to use slots and props in ways that are good for accessibility, things like that. At the bottom, there's a bunch of links to articles and talks and things I've given that are in more detail about how to do some of this debugging. This has been like a part of my life for a long time as a developer, and in writing Vue things, I had to go on a bit of a journey to, learn to write well accessibly, and I think there's always room for improvement. So these are some resources that I hope are kind of friendly and approachable. So I will pause there and see if we have any questions or anything that I can answer at this point. Just let me know.
We do. We have time for a few questions. Let's see. Do the sites need to have an .eu ending for this to be enforced?
No. So it works just like the kind of GDPR regulations where it is applied to dealing with European citizens. So if I'm a citizen of Ireland, which I am, and I'm using a website, it doesn't really matter where in the world I am for the privacy regulation to apply to me. Likewise, for companies all around the world who do business in the EU, if you're serving European customers, that's where the obligation comes in. I'm sure the enforcement is different if you're not based in those countries, because it's harder to enforce some company that's based elsewhere. But it definitely does not just apply to like EU domains or European companies.
Thank you. All right. They use the WebAIM Wave as a initial test for the accessibility. Can you recommend any other tools, please?
So yeah, Wave is fantastic. Axe Core is the other one I mentioned, and because that's built into some other tools, that's an extension you can use in the browser as well. And one thing I've kind of learned, there are a few others. IBM has an equal access checker, a few things that come to mind. What I've seen recommended, though, is not necessarily to bounce around different tools that are going to tell you different things, that you might want to have just a consistent set of results. So the automation is telling you the same thing. And for me, that's Axe Core, because Axe Core has linters, it has plugins for all of the testing things you could be using, it has a browser extension. And so you can get great agreement and alignment between seeing something in Axe Core and then having it send it over to a developer, and they're going to also see that in their automation tests. It's going to all agree with itself. So even though that you can get slightly different insights from 3 or 4 types of accessibility testing tools, you might want to focus on one to kind of start with at least.
And I'm going with this question next because they're using Wave as well. Do you know of a list of testing tools that may cover WCAG 2.0 level AA requirements specifically, or the ones that you just listed do?
They do to the extent that automation can cover them. And most of the tools have a way for you to filter to just that set of results as well. So it should be possible even using Wave, which I'm the least experienced with Wave because I've been in the Axe world for a while. But yeah, being able to filter to just the criteria that match the standard you want should be okay.
Great, thank you. And last question, One of the problems we have is knowing when it's enough. How do we determine when the website is ready for screen readers?
That's a really interesting one. You have a few options because you're never going to know it's perfect. If you are kind of what we call axe clean or clean in your automated accessibility reports, that means you have either solved all of the kind of labeling and automatically detected things, and you're in a good baseline for accessibility users. It doesn't have to wait for that, though. If you have people who can give you feedback, then it's very hard for me to say there's a definite line. But I do think of 3 levels that I think make sense to think about. The first is basic usability. So this is trying to get the automation straight and trying to maybe look around yourself with a keyboard and maybe use a screen reader, even if you're not really good with them. Just make sure the experience makes some sense, or look in the accessibility tree. So like as developers not experienced in accessibility, we should have some confidence of being basically usable. And that's where I'd start to get feedback. But the 2 levels above that are like, okay, we want to comply with the web content accessibility guidelines, which are extensive and cover a lot of things. That is a compliance aspect of it that sometimes is a layer above basic usability. And then real usability is, it actually is a meaningful, correct experience for screen reader users. And you have validation from people who like use screen readers or use other assistive technology, that it's not an annoying, repetitive experience, that it's like functional for them and they can experience everything they need to. But once you're at basic usability, I would say you can ship it. And as long as you commit to responding to feedback, basic usability should get you able to respond to feedback and have users. That would probably be my recommendation.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Mark.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for bearing with me on the internet. It usually works just like this. So hopefully this was a lot better than earlier. I appreciate it a lot.
Yes, the internet had decided to allow us. They were on our side for this one. So thank you again.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, y'all.